You're listening to Boobies and Newbies. Find and follow Boobies and Newbies at Boobies Podcast across platforms and on boobiesandnewbies.com. And don't forget at Real Kelly Ray on TikTok, because TikTok thinks I'm making porn if I use boobies in the handle. Thanks, TikTok! Welcome to Boobies and Newbies, the podcast that asks novice romance readers to think outside the dick in a box and brave the unbridled world of erotica. I'm your host, Kelly Reynolds, and today we are diving into another Steamy Spotlight author interview. And this time we are talking about a subject near and dear to my heart, plus-size baddies. Now, before we get into it, I'd like to take a brief moment to remind all of our listeners, new and old, that the best way to find out what we're reading next and who we're chatting with is to hop on over to the Boobies and Newbies social platforms at Boobies Podcast across the board, except on TikTok. You will find me at Real Kelly Ray. You can always catch up on past episodes of the podcast on our website, boobiesandnewbies.com, or on your favorite podcast app. If you're a fan of the podcast and you've got a few minutes to spare, I would greatly appreciate a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. And lastly, if you want to show this podcaster and indie author a little extra love, you might consider supporting Boobies and Newbies on our Patreon. In fact, we recently had an influx of new Patreon supporters, so I just wanted to take a quick moment to shout them out. Jimbo, Erica, Courtney, Carrie, Alana, and Jason. Thank you so much for joining the Boobies and Newbies Patreon family. We are lucky to have you. With that being said, please join me in welcoming today's guest, Kayla Grosse. Kayla's latest release, Rein Me In, marks the start of her new series, The Cowboys of Nighthawk. Welcome, Kayla.
Hey.
Glad to have you. And honestly, I can't believe this is the first time we're actually speaking together, because I feel like this conversation has been a long time coming, considering we have so much in common.
I know. I feel like we kept trying to connect, and then life just kept getting in the way.
As it does. But we did find our time. And for anybody who's less familiar with Kayla's work, Kayla and I both write plus-size characters. We've both lived in Los Angeles, and I didn't realize it until I started preparing for our interview, but we actually both went to film school and got our start in filmmaking. So it's a wonder that we didn't even run into each other in person at some point.
Maybe I had already, because I think you're 3 years younger than me. So maybe I had, you're following in the footsteps, 3 years behind me, maybe.
Okay. So 3 years ago, me, 2015 Kelly was not in the same place as 2015 Kayla. That would have been 2012 Kayla.
Yeah, exactly.
So after film school and you moved to LA, here you are writing romance. You have a new release out, which we will 100% get to in a few moments. But I'd just like to know, in all of that, where did romance novels factor in? How did your journey with both reading and writing them begin?
Well, it's kind of funny because, and I always feel like such a, can I say douche canoe on here?
Oh, 100%.
I always feel like a douche canoe or just like a jerk because, I meet all these authors that their dream in life has always been to write books and to publish books. And they've always been avid readers. And, that was just not me. I have gone through many phases in my life, like many people in our generation, I feel like, especially, but where I've just changed my mind of what I've wanted to do so many times. And I also think I get that from my dad. My dad's the same way. He's been so many different things in my lifetime. But he is above all that, he's an amazing photographer, and my mom is also kind of art driven too. Even though neither of their careers are in art. So I think I was the first one to be like, I'm actually going to do a career in art. And initially I thought I was going to be the next Peter Jackson and like direct Lord of the Rings Part 2. I don't know.
Part 7.
7 million. And so I went to film school and quickly realized that like me and that sort of like the actual production side, I didn't really care for that much. Like I liked it. Somehow I ended up becoming an editor. Like so I edited stuff for a couple of years and I didn't really like that either. I was just good at it. I always kind of like, I've always been a romantic. Like I've always, so I started getting into like fangirling, fan fiction stuff, like at a very young age. Like I always say the dawn of the internet. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, and I will say you are not the first author I've spoken to that fan fiction played like a huge role in their writing trajectory. So that, I think that is something that a lot of authors do have in common.
Yes. So, you know, it's funny. Like I'll always say like, oh, I'd never planned on being a writer, but then I must have like blocked things out. I don't know. But like my first grade teacher or something, was it first grade? My mom found something, or no, not found something. She ran into my first grade teacher or something and told her I wrote a book. And she was like, I always knew Kayla would be a writer. And I was like, what?
Like, did I know that? Did we all share that notion?
And like, I remember writing little things, like dirty things. I was dirty. I don't even know where it came from. I guess maybe in another life, I was just like sexually free, because in this life, I definitely am not, like more so now in my like 30s, but like growing up, no, I was hidden. I was like scared, but I would write things on paper that probably like if my mom saw them was like, this girl needs therapy. She's only 6 years old.
It sounds like it's, you know, and I think we see this a lot, especially when I talk to friends who are kind of facing the ramifications of like purity culture and just like even if you weren't even if you're not like deconstructing religion in any way, like even if you were just a woman who was a girl growing up in like the 90s, I do think there was this major emphasis on purity culture that like I've never been to church a day in my life, and I can say with full certainty that that was still something that was kind of like hammered into us like from an early age of like, you know, no, like that we don't talk about these things. And I think most of the time it was really just for like the comfortability of our parents and our grandparents, like the older generations that just didn't want to have those conversations with us. And so what did people do? They turned to reading. They turned to watching Showtime After Dark. They turned to reading and writing fan fiction. And I really do think that's why so many of us have like similar stories, especially like, you know, I know we're both in our 30s. So I think that is something that a lot of us had in common from that time.
Yeah, 100%. And so the roundabout way that I'm answering your question is that I started, so my mom was really big into soap operas.
Nice.
And she was a Days of Our Lives girl. So I'm named after Kayla from Days of Our Lives. She tries to backtrack and say that her name's Linda Kay and my name's Kayla Lynn. She said it's like a combo. I was like, liar! You told me when I was a kid that I was named after her. Anyway, so she would record it on VHS. I grew up on that, right? Already, like kind of outside, like the romance, like kind of outside reality way of thinking, like over dramatic. And you don't really realize how that affects you, I don't think, until you're older. And then I started watching in my teens Passions, which I think a lot of people did. And so I became obsessed with Passions. And funny enough, I've always been the person that like ships the odd couples, like where you're just like, where did that come from? There was like this Passions companion novel, and I asked my mom to buy it for me, and she didn't know like what was in there, right? So I got it. I think you had to order it off of the television. I don't even remember.
Oh, remember those days? I do.
Yeah.
That's how I ended up with the 3 VHS box set of The 10th Kingdom. Did you ever watch that?
Me too.
We ordered that off the TV. You had to call in and order the 3 VHS box set. And by the way, now you can watch the whole damn thing on YouTube.
Oh, really? I bought it on Amazon. I bought it on Amazon because I was like, I need to watch this again. And it's so good. I'm like still so sad they never did a second one. They were supposed to do a second one.
It was like genuinely pretty great. And I highly recommend it to anybody who hasn't watched it. And you can watch it on YouTube.
Yeah. It's amazing. I freaking love. Oh my god. Anyway, I could talk forever. I could do a whole 10th Kingdom podcast. I'd be down. I know a lot of people too who would be guests on that podcast because they love it too.
We will talk about that.
Yeah. So like stuff like that. Like I was really into that, and it's funny because then when I got older, so Passions was the first like book that I read with sex scenes in it, and I like highlighted them and then brought them to my 6th grade class and showed people. Okay, because that was the type of girl that I was.
You were
like,
that
look
kid.
at this scandalous stuff. Yeah, I was the bad influence, which is hilarious to me.
Love it. This is like the preteen girls version of like showing your friends a Playboy from under your dad's bed. You know, it's like, 100%. But like for preteen girls, it's like, ooh, I brought this Nora Roberts book to show to my friends and highlight these specific scenes.
Yeah, 100%. I bet they were pretty tame. I should go back and look. So I then was obsessed with The Practice, and Bobby and Lindsay were my ship.
Okay.
Girl, this is why I'm saying I'm weird. I don't know.
It was just a trajectory that I wasn't expecting, considering like from the soap operas to like, I know fantasy is like a big thing. You mentioned Peter Jackson, and then into Private Practice. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, The Practice was my jam. I love that show. I'll still rewatch it pre like later seasons, but I loved Bobby and Lindsay. And so I started to that was actually my first glimpse into the world of fan fiction. It's actually how I found out what fan fiction was.
Nice.
Stayed up all night one night reading Bobby and Lindsay fan fiction on fanfiction.net. You know, I was like that middle schooler. I don't know.
Yeah.
Weird. I also like shipped, you know, the pink and green Power Ranger when I was a kid.
Oh my gosh. Oh my God. You are for sure like unlocking a core memory. Because I for sure, when I was a kid, had a Power Rangers themed birthday party. Like I was probably 5 or 6. And we had a pink Power Ranger piñata, as you do, right? And but she was the one that like most kids who watched Power Rangers, most girls who watched Power Rangers wanted to be the pink one, because you know there were only 2 girls, right? There were only a couple of them, and she was always the one painted as being like the romantic interest one. Like it's so funny how that even creeps into childhood programming, like it, you know. The other Power Ranger, who I want to say was the yellow one, and she was also Asian, which I'm just like, that's not.
I know, right?
That's not okay.
Like, as you said that, I was like, oh, I didn't
even. I know, lots of problems, but she was always kind of given the like best friend role, or like, oh, she's the other girl that's there, and it's like. We've seen that so many times, especially with, especially for us, like for plus size characters, we see that a lot with like minority characters that like they're there to basically like serve the interests of the beautiful blonde white girl lead. And like, I 100% bought into it. I was a pink Power Ranger girl all the way.
Oh. Me too, girl. I actually, in my first book, I mentioned my crush on the green Power. Well, not mine. It's Birdie's, but you know, that was like part of my like, you know. And I actually had a lot of people reach out to me and like screenshot the green Power, and they were like, "I had a crush on him too." I was like, "Of course we did." He's like the long hair, you know, Tommy and Kimberly forever.
Mm-hmm. Do you know what another one is like? And this is why I get so upset when people bring up things, especially like. In the conversations that we're seeing had a lot right now politically about like legislating against like the LGBTQ community, where people will be like, oh, well, we're fine with what you do. Just don't put it in our faces. Don't like teach kids this. And I'm like, what? Are you not remembering all of the shows and movies that we've been watching for years as kids where there was always a heterosexual romance going on? I had this conversation with my dad recently because we were talking about Scooby-Doo, of all things. And I think it was when the whole conversation came about Velma being lesbian, and the show creators were like, yeah, she's always been a lesbian. I don't know why this is surprising people. Like, she's very queer coded. And I was like, well, yeah, and Fred and what's her face, Daphne, like, they always had a romance or like this sexual tension going on. And my dad was like, what are you talking about? I'm like, did we not watch the same show? Like, you're the one who showed me this. Like, they very much make it a romance between Fred and Daphne. Like, it's not even, like, hinted. It's very obvious, like, in almost every version of Scooby-Doo. But he just was like, I've never noticed that. Like, it just seemed like them doing their thing. It just was wild to me that, you know, especially, like, as writers, I think we tend to break these things down like a little bit more, but it's so funny to me that that's not everybody's read of certain shows and movies and books.
It's interesting, right? I know the things that I watched, I mean, and the fan fiction world, I mean, that just opened up so many things that I had never, and then fan fiction led to porn, which
of course
I don't know if that led to if that was everybody else's trajectory. I watched so much porn and I learned so much about things, and then that led to my sister is 2 years older than me, and she and her friends too would, like, I don't know if you remember the Canadian sex lady on Oxygen, I think it was, with like where she would talk to people over the phone.
Is it Dr. Ruth? Like, that's who I think of.
But I think so.
She was
it wasn't her. Yeah, this was a Canadian woman, and she would get calls in from people in Canada. And
Love
like the things were hilarious. Like, I got this stuck up my butt. What should I do? Like, literally.
The amount of things that people get stuck up their butt. Like, can we just... I just want to put that out there. Like, Google it.
I know. There's a reason why South Park has so many episodes about this, okay? Yeah, so I watched like stuff like that, and she would review. She had a thing called a pleasure chest, and she'd review sex toys at the end. And then, so that's how I learned about sex toys. And then, like, also watching Undressed on MTV after my parents went to sleep.
Yeah,
you know, just so many things like that I learned. Again, I didn't really ever think about writing. Like, I would write because like I dissociated, I think, from like book writing and fan fiction. So I actually wrote like a 600-page fan fiction about Hairspray.
Oh my God.
And it's long gone from the internet. So if you go looking for it, you're not going to find it.
Hairspray, like Tracy Turnblad Hairspray?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. 100%. Because that was the first time I saw on the screen, at least for me.
Yeah.
Of plus-size woman and a straight-sized man who was the popular boy fall in love with the fat girl.
Yeah.
Blatantly. Like, and Zac Efron, love that guy.
Oh, so you're talking about the more recent Hairspray, too.
Yes, the more recent. Yeah.
Ricky Lake Hairspray is also, like,
amazing. Kiss. Yes, I saw that afterwards.
Yep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But I just remember, like, oh my God, I was like, I wanted Nikki Blonsky, who came out as a lesbian now, and Zac Efron to be together so bad. I was like, please show Hollywood that this is possible. Mm-hmm. But they like went on a whole tour. Like, I could go on, like, this was like a fandom of mine. I like, they went on a world tour. They were like holding hands and acting all lovey-dovey, and people were guessing whether or not they were secretly together while he was with Vanessa Hudgens. It was like a whole thing. And that was the first time I really had like this awakening, I feel like, of like, oh, maybe men do like plus size women, because I had then grown up in this world of like, you know, only pretty people get guys. And like, you know, I had my sister's very pretty, and she was a softball player and blonde and had the curly ringlets, and guys just like fell all over her, and she was always out with friends, and I was like friend zoned like my entire life. And my guy friends were amazing, I love them, but of course they never liked me back, and like all this kind of stuff. And so I kind of grew up in this world of like, oh, that like romance is not for me. So seeing that, like Lincoln Tracy on screen in 2006, I think it was, I saw it in the theaters like 5 times. I was obsessed.
I totally did too. Hairspray for years, as a theater kid, Hairspray for years was like one of my favorite musicals. Like, it's still up there for sure. But I think a lot of my attachment to it is for the fact that not only is she a plus size character. And she really, at least from what I can think of with musicals, she's really the only character I know of from musicals who is written to be plus size. Like, she is written specifically to be a plus size character. And on top of that, she's very happy with herself. Like, there is never a moment in that show where she's like, oh, I'm doubting myself for my size. She loves who she is. She knows what she wants. She has goals. She has dreams. And never in that does her size like ever factor into the decision she makes, which is just so refreshing to see. And it's honestly sad that like this is like the one example that we have of positive plus size representation and fat joy in a musical. Yeah. Like, it's, and that's not to say that there haven't been other ones. Really. Yeah, it's true. Like, it's so rare to find. And I think that's why in the last few years, especially, there have been so many people reading romance who have been saying, oh my God, I love this. I want to read more of this. And I know all of the plus size writers that I follow, almost exclusively write fat joy. It's never about weight loss. It's never about, I'm not going to get his love because I look a certain way. And I think that's in part thanks to a lot of things that we're seeing also like off the page. Like, we're seeing Lizzo and we're seeing all this like wonderful like fat liberation and representation happening in our fashion, in our movies. I mean, it's still not enough. Like, it's still nowhere near enough for my taste personally. But it's a step. It's a step in the right direction. And I want more of it. And that's why I love books like the ones you're writing.
Oh, thank you. Ultimately, my writing journey, like, it went from, fan fiction to fantasy romance, where it was straight size people, like kind of written sort of after Twilight people. Because that's when I started writing it. It was like during the Twilight.
It was an era. Like, it was an era that shaped us all.
Yeah. So the book wasn't published until 2019, but like I started it 8 years prior to that. So it was, anyway.
Yeah,
so
there you go.
That was, straight size people. And then Falling for the Manny, again, straight size people, because I co-wrote that. And that was just, a fun project for me and my friend that we really enjoyed doing. So it wasn't about bodies or anything like that. It was just a romance novel,
Mm-hmm.
And then when I got to, I don't know what spurred it, but it was like, I think I was in a rock star romance phase. And I was reading all these rock star romance books by Julia Wolf.
Oh my God, yes.
Yeah, she had a couple like curvy women.
Yep.
And I was like, okay, I like this, but I was like, it's still not how I would write it. You know what I'm saying? When you read a book and you're like, I like this. I like where it's going. But like, let's try it a little bit differently or something.
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, we just had Julia Wolf on for our Tit Talk panel about destigmatizing cannabis in romance. But that was one of the things that I did bring up was I was like, I love that not only do most of your books feature characters like happily smoking pot or doing edibles, but like also you do happen to write like a lot of curvy characters like in your book, which I am thankful for as well. But no, I totally understand what you're saying.
Yeah, no, she's great. I love her books. I still read them. And my favorite one was about the drummer, Maeve, I think her name was.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that one was really good. I love that one. So I was kind of in that phase. And then I also, I don't know what spurred, I think it was a conversation with my friend. And I thought about, I like you like that, because I had this experience with one of my really good friends, and he's still a good friend. I was obsessed with him. Oh my God. Which it's so funny looking back on like your 15-year-old self when your like hormones were raging and like you didn't understand. Like, and I'm also a person who's still like, I am a hyper fixator. So I was like hyper fixated on him. Oh boy. And it's funny because he's like half my size. I'm 5'10", he's 5'7". He's like got the metabolism of a rabbit. Like, I don't even know. He's skinny. And I just like could crush this boy. Okay, I'm like twice his size.
We love a good short king. Just saying.
I know, no, totally. But it was like at that time, it was like did not make sense, right?
Yeah.
But he was like so nice to me, and like still is. He's a great guy. And I don't know what we were on AIM, and I was like, I don't know what I said. I don't remember the context of how it came up, but it wasn't like I woke up that morning and it was like, I'm gonna like kind of Birdie in the book, she decides she's gonna tell Liam I like you like this, I didn't wake up to do that. No. It was like some, I don't know, happenstance, and he was like, I don't even know if he meant it the way he meant it. It's just like, I'll never like you like that, basically, is what he said. He literally said
Thanks.
That to me. And I was like, ugh, like dagger to the heart. Like, I shall never be the same.
There's nothing like teenage boy honesty. Like, it is brutal to say the least. Like, it's just teenage honesty in general. Like, it's either that like they don't say anything like, oh yeah, sure, or they're just like straight to the point, like, oh yeah, no, I don't like you like that, and I never will. Like, there's like nothing in between.
And it's funny because sometimes in reviews I'll get like, I don't understand why that was such a big deal for her. Like, why'd she care so much when this guy said this to her? And I was just like, imagine being a 15-year-old
that would
girl.
Gut any 15-year-old girl. I don't know what planet people are living on where they read that and they're like, oh, that wouldn't do anything to me. No, let's not like pretend. Come on. You've been 15 before too.
So I don't know. This came up in this conversation with a friend and I was like, this would make a good preface, like a good start to a book, like where she's a 15-year-old and because like I do still think about that sometimes, like randomly. It doesn't hurt my feelings anymore, but it definitely like scarred me on like a deep level that I guess I hadn't really realized. So I was like in this sort of era of like, I want to try to write books about what I look like. And I had a psychic tell me that I needed to do.
Oh, well, like there you go.
So I was like, okay. I was like, I'm going to do it. Yeah, that's how I Like You Like That kind of came to be with writing somebody that looked like me, because I was kind of sick of reading books too.
15-year-old trauma and from the word of a psychic.
I know. This is my life. This is what I do, okay? I am very much, like, reliant on moments of, like, happenstance. Like, Rain Me In was also, which we can get into later, was also kind of written in that sort of way. It's just funny.
I mean, I know this conversation has gone so many places between, like, fan fiction and soap operas, but it's, like, it really is, like, when you're fed this narrative from an early age about, like, what love looks like in movies, in books, and TV shows, but you're only seeing very specific looking and acting types of people experiencing that love, and 9 out of 10 times they don't look like either one of us. I mean, yes, we are white women, so I guess we have that in our favor, but yeah, it's just like, it definitely is like demoralizing, and it does make you, look at love, look at relationships in different ways. And it's just interesting that we're only having these conversations now. I mean, we're in our 30s. Like, where were these conversations a generation ago? But a generation ago, women couldn't have bank accounts. So, I mean, it's just, it's so wild, like, and it's just another example, and I talk about this on this podcast all the time, of how art is very political, and it's very much a representation of what's going on in the zeitgeist. What the world looks like today is very much reflected in the media that we consume, and what we consume in our media is very much reflected in the world we live in. So it all is very relevant, and that's why I like having conversations like this and talking about those things. So yay. Well, and here you are with Rein Me In, and I'd love to know how you made the leap from rock stars to cowboys.
These are my two sides, I think.
And you have a horse. I know that you have a horse. I see you post about your beautiful horse online all the time.
Thank you. Which, by the way, I literally was able to buy because I Like You Like That did so well.
I love that.
I'm still like a very small indie author. So people out there, like, I know that sounds crazy. Like, oh my God, she earned that much money to buy a horse. But I also have a full-time job. So let's just,
you don't need to explain anything to anybody. If you want to buy
I just don't want people to think like, I just don't want people to think like, oh, I should become an indie author because then like I make so much money. No.
Build up my stable of horses.
No. It was definitely a risk still to buy him. But I was like, you know what? Yeah. So I grew up with horses. I owned a horse when I was a kid. I got a job at Cold Stone Creamery. That's actually how I met I Like You Like That guy.
Oh my gosh.
I got that job at Cold Stone because I need to pay for my horse. So I got a horse and I was into horse shows. I was in 4-H. I was like that kind of girl. And I did horses. I had all my horse girlfriends and they were the best. And I had a great time doing that. But when I discovered Lord of the Rings, my friend made me watch it for Orlando Bloom. It like kind of changed the trajectory of my life. Not only did I start a hyperfixation on Orlando Bloom, but I then became obsessed, and that's how I decided to go to film school and which ultimately led me here today. So I gave up horses to move to California. So I actually sold my horse, and which I thought I would never do. And then I actually went on like a 6 or 7, I don't know, a long time without riding. And a couple of years ago, I was like, you know what? I need horses back in my life. So I started leasing horses over there. And then, it just sort of was like, then I put on my like New Year's resolutions. This year I want to buy a horse, and here we are.
And you got your horse.
A month later, I bought one. Yeah. So I got into like a cowboy romance kick kind of after I wrote I Like You Like That. And I was like, why are there no plus size cowgirls? Funny again. So my high school girlfriends, we finally, after like 10 years of trying, did a girls trip to San Diego. And we go to downtown San Diego, and I was getting over being sick. So I wasn't drinking and I wasn't feeling that great the whole trip. So they're all drinking. It's our last night there. We're walking down in downtown San Diego. We see this bar, and it's called Double Deuces. And it's a bull riding bar.
I knew that was coming. I knew this was leading to like mechanical bull, because I was like, I'm not sure what this, but then I was like, mechanical bull for sure. Like this is where this is going. Yeah.
So we didn't go in, but there was like where the bull was. There had like glass windows with no curtains or anything,
so you can see it like from outside.
Yeah. So there was like a barricade, right? We're standing there. There's like a bouncer or whatever. And so we're just like, oh, let's watch for fun for a few minutes, right? It's pretty packed. And they have like a woman and a man, like, I'm just going to call them bull wranglers because that's what I call them in my book. They're like the people putting people on the bull and like feeding them shots and like jumping on the bed, like doing all the cuckoo stuff that you see online, right? So we're standing there, and this, like, I'm with my girlfriends who are all, again, they're like skinny, kind of traditionally cute, especially like my one friend. She's like very all-American girl next door looking. And, so my whole life, everybody always looks at them before they look at me. And I'm not saying that in like a negative way. It just is how it is, right? So I'm standing there next to them, whatever. I look cute. I'm standing there, and the bull wrangler, the male one, spots me from inside. And I don't know what he decides that, like, he keeps doing this thing, and nobody can see this on, because we're not on video, but like Kelly can see me. He kept doing that eye thing, like to me.
Like, I'm watching you.
Come, and he was doing the finger thing. Come in here.
Come to me.
Come in here. And he was cute, at least from a distance.
Yeah.
And he was doing it just to me, not to any. There was other people too. And I was like, I was so confused. Like, that just shows you still like how like programmed I can be sometimes.
Yeah.
And all my friends were like, Kayla, you should go in. I was like, if I go in, I'm going to show everyone my cooch because I'm wearing a skirt with regular underwear.
That's okay.
2, I was like, 2, I will vomit all over this floor.
That's also okay. Like, let's see, you would not be the first. For like, if you are a bull wrangler for a mechanical bull, do you think they don't get like their shots of coochie and like vomit like on the regular? Of course they do. Like they know it is part of the job.
We tried to go in, but then there was like a $20 cover, and we're like, no.
Ugh.
So anyway, I missed my meet cute, but that's literally how this book started. And the book was like, ended up being 1,000 times different than what I had initially planned it to be. But that was how it started, was like this idea of, he's spots her, he wants her to ride the bull.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah. And so the bull is kind of its own character in this book, and I love that. I really love it too. The book ended up being like totally different than I thought, but it's probably my most favorite thing I've written
so far.
So far.
That's so funny, because I really do. You got me thinking about how I think a lot of stories that we write do tend to come from opportunities we wish we had taken. That it's like, whether it's a meet cute or not, but just like you're somewhere and you see somebody and you're like, oh my God, what if this happened? Or what if I had said this? Like, I know for me, and this is one of those ones that still haunts me to this day, was when I lived in Chicago. I rode the train like every day, right? I mean, I didn't have a car there. I just took the train and the bus. And you see a lot of real interesting characters on the train. Like, it's the reason why all of the screenplays that I've written always take place in Chicago, because I just think there's so much story there that's untapped. But I remember there being this one day that I was taking the train either to school or to work, and this guy was sitting like across from me a few seats down, and he was reading a book, which that's hot enough on its own. But like, it was one of those days where I was just like jamming so hard to whatever I was listening to that I for sure was probably like mouthing the words, if not like letting some of the song like actually slip out. And I just remember us making eye contact multiple times. I remember there being like, that sort of like smirk, like the tilt of the lips, like on the side, like smile. And I just like, to this day, I'm like, oh my God, could have been my husband. Could have been my husband. Like, if I had just said something. But, it's inspiration for a story, at least.
Exactly. That's why I think it's so important. Actually, funny enough, I always remember something Zac Efron said in an interview that I watched once. Where he was talking about he really liked storytelling, and because he's an actor, but he also blah blah whatever. And he was like, anything can be a story. Like, if you're paying attention, like if you're looking at something, like he's like, you could make a story out of an inanimate object. Like you could, and I always just, that stuck with me. I was like, oh yeah, like that is true. And as writers, like, the more you open yourself up creatively and the more you explore, the more things always become stories. Like, anywhere I go now, sitting somewhere, see somebody, I'm like, oh, that could be a romance, or that could be, I was in Florida the other week, and saw a hot guy with a backwards cap and tats, and I was like, well,
that could be any
romance story, But like me meeting a guy in Florida at a beach bar,
for sure.
Where's that gonna go? All that kind of stuff.
It's obviously a one-night stand romance turned accidental pregnancy after the vacation hookup. Obviously, Kayla.
Obviously.
I've gotten very much into reading romance when there's no third act conflict. Like, I have go-to authors where I know that they don't do the third act breakup. And I'm like, perfect. That's exactly what I want to read right now.
Well, Rain Me In does not have a third act breakup. Just so
whoop, whoop. There you go.
I actually did a poll on Instagram when I was writing it. Do you care, people, if there's no third act breakup? Because I was like, this book does not need one. I was like, if I put one in here, I feel like it ruins the entire book. Because I'm like, there's sometimes when the characters already are facing so much throughout the book, whether it's emotional or physical or an external source or whatever, and then you just like put a third act breakup in there because that's kind of what people expect from romance novels. I feel like it just is like, as a reader, I'm like, ugh, like I know they're going to get back together. Like, you could have just X
You
made
said
this.
it perfectly. It's when it feels like it's there just because we have the expectation of it being there based on the genre conventions. There are definitely plenty of romance novels where they have the third act breakup that I'm like, okay, this makes perfect sense with what's going on, with the way the story was set up. You know, this makes perfect sense that this is happening. But I would say too many times I read a book and it feels like it's only happening because of that expectation. That it doesn't, it's the same with grand gesture, winner back at the end moments. I feel like too often they have nothing to do with the characters and the story that we're reading. I'm like, you don't get to hold up a boombox like John Cusack. Like, that made sense for that story. And honestly, it didn't even make sense in Say Anything. Like, it did not make sense that he did that. But you can't apply that to every story and it feel authentic for the characters. Like, it has to feel authentic for the story you are writing.
Yeah, being an author is interesting right now. I feel like there's a lot of stuff that's like influencing what authors are writing because they want to sell books. And I have also too fallen victim to that sometimes. Like recently I've been feeling like, why don't I write hockey romances? And I was like, Kayla, that's because you don't like hockey. You're not a sports girl, right? But I actually like came to this, like, actually my novella is going to have something to do with hockey, but I think it's funny because for me, it's like, I heard
too.
I watched your TikTok or like I saw your thing.
That was such an accident. Like, again, it's like I made one video about responding to a hockey thing and now everyone's like, Kelly, write a hockey romance. I'm like, this was not on the agenda. This was not on the plan. But I also am like, I kind of do want to write a hockey romance. So I don't know. I'm gonna work it in.
Hot. They fly off the shelves like hotcakes.
Yeah. I think one of the things though that you and I have in common is like, you want to like cater to what people want to read, but at the same time, we want to write stories featuring characters that we haven't gotten to see, that we want to write the characters that like we want to read, and because nobody else is writing them, you want to write them yourself. But then it's kind of finding that balance of like, how can I write something for myself but also make sure it's like marketable for other people to read?
It's a happy medium. That's why I was like kind of joking, like the book might have some hockey stuff in it, but it has nothing to do with hockey at the same time. Like, that's why I was like laughing about it, because I was like, how can I write a hockey romance without actually ever doing anything involved with like hockey?
That's honestly most hockey romance.
Yes, let's be honest.
Yes. Like, you see some locker room chat sometimes, but like the amount of hockey romance I've read where I've learned absolutely nothing about hockey, it's definitely the majority.
Yeah, I started kind of looking at Pucking Around because everybody's been talking about it, right?
By Emily Rath, just so people know if they haven't read it yet. Emily is a longtime friend of the podcast.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, so I started kind of just looking at it because, again, not a hockey girly. So I was like, but it's been doing amazing because I wanted to see, like, what's going on with this book. And every time she started, like, in the beginning that I started reading it, every time she started talking about hockey, my brain was like, like off.
Yeah, I will say Emily is actually a hockey fan.
Yeah.
Like,
I could
she
tell,
is actually
for sure.
a hockey fan. And so much of her book like actually has, and she has different positions in hockey. She is an equipment manager. Like, for anybody who hasn't read Pucking Around yet, I do recommend.
Definitely a book talk book. Like, it's like, it's a quintessential. It's like Ice Planet Barbarians went around. It's kind of like, to me, It's like the hockey version. Sans aliens, sans other planets. You know, but that's kind of the vibe. So, good for her. The book talk world is wild.
But if you want to read a book that's a hockey romance that actually has hockey in it, you can read that. I know that there are just as many girlies like you and me who we could not give a flying puck about hockey itself, but will we read a hockey romance? Sure. Like, you know, I think you're going to get fans of each.
Totally. And you know what needs to be done though still? And I'm wondering if has she said that she's going to write another book about the best friend from that book? Poppy, is it?
I know that she's writing more in the series, but I don't know who they're about.
So, because just for anybody who wants to know, Poppy's like the main character's best friend and she's a size 20. She says that. Because again, bringing this back around to talking about plus size people, there's very few hockey. I can only think of one off the top of my head. Hockey romances with plus size women. And in the hockey one that I read, because purely I read it because it was a plus size character and it was like a brand new one. And I was like, I'll give it a try. And it was on audio and I felt like listening to something on the airplane. So downloaded it. And I was very sad because I was like, finally, I see this one. So she says, okay, she's a size like 14, 16, something like that, which is more mid-sized to me. And then, which is fine. Again, I'm fine. Like any sort of representation for all bodies is good. So that wasn't my qualm at all. My qualm is that the whole book was focused on her mom's trauma to this poor girl, like trying to get her to lose weight her whole life.
No. Yeah, it's a no for me. Like the minute you said it's focused on her mom, I was like, oh, I already see where this is going. I already know it's going to be about like how she wants her daughter to, you know, it makes me think of, God, it's stuck with me so long. That movie Spanglish.
Yes.
The mom like buys her daughter pants that are like a size too small, like on purpose to be like, now's the time you're gonna lose weight, honey. Or like, I remember it being very cool when I was a kid, and I'm talking about when I was like 11, 12, 13, for you to like have Slim Fast for breakfast.
I did that.
And rice cake. Oh, I 100% did that. I did Weight Watchers with my mom.
Yep, same.
Like,
mom, my sister.
So many things, but I'm with you in that. And I think this is one of the things I wanted to talk about with you too, was that as somebody who is writing predominantly plus size characters, I think there are a lot of things that people get wrong about it. And I think, you know what, it's not even fair for me to say that they get wrong about it, but that I just feel like we need to steer away from, because I feel like it's just reinforcing these traditional stereotypes about being fat, that you can't happily exist in this body, that you don't have family or friends that support you, you know, unless you're a certain size, that you are always on some kind of dieting or weight loss journey. Like I just am so sick of reading those. It's the same way I feel when I read, I love reading queer characters in books. I love reading LGBTQ romance. I love writing it. But I don't want every story about LGBTQ characters to be about their coming out story. I don't want it to be about them discovering their sexuality. Can those stories exist? Absolutely. And I think that they should, but I don't think that should be their entire narrative, because like, you are not just a queer person. You are not just a fat person. Your entire identity is not wrapped up in being fat, gay, bisexual. You know, I mean, it's just, that's the thing that I'm so tired of seeing, which is why I will usually only read plus size romance from plus size people.
Yes. And it's interesting you say that, because I was actually having that thought earlier that I think we're kind of in this sort of dangerous position right now with plus size characters in books and stuff, where it's very niche now. Not niche, sorry. It's like, it's a fad to write in that niche. And because I've been noticing a lot of thinner women now jumping on that bandwagon, sort of, because they think it's a bandwagon. And I'm kind of like, not cool for me, because you'll never understand what it's like to be in a body that was constantly ridiculed, whether that was through even nonverbal, like looks, or verbal, or comments like, oh, you have such pretty hair, because that was the only thing that people wanted to comment about you, that kind of thing. You'll never really understand. So when people write a book where they're thin and they write a fat person, I generally am like, I just feel like you did it because you wanted it for marketing, and that was about it.
I'm a little leery. Like, and that's not to say that it can't be done well, but
not.
it's kind of the same approach that I think a lot of people bring to reading a book about BIPOC characters written by a white person.
Yeah.
Because they're right, especially people from the BIPOC community. They are perfectly right to have those feelings. And I think they come from a very valid place. And I think that's sort of a similar principle that I apply when, as a fat woman, I'm sitting down to read a book that's got this beautiful fat woman on the cover, that then I see the picture of the author and, you know, she's like a size 3, that I'm like, I'm curious what this is going to look like. Mm-hmm. Like, and I'm already kind of entering it with like this negative bias because of the experiences that I've had with reading stories in the past. And it feels like a fad, or it feels like it's the character fat shaming themselves, or everybody is fat shaming them. And it just, when you have those experiences, and I'm sure there'll be people listening to this episode or, you know, who respond to things that I post regularly about this, saying like, well, you can't go into it and like judge them that it's going to go that way. You can. Like, if you've had enough bad experiences and they seem to have a commonality amongst them, you generally enter with caution. Like, I mean, we apply this to so many different things in our lives, especially as women. I think we do that. It's usually a safety precaution, like whether it's a mental, emotional, or physical safety that we're talking about.
Yeah. And, you know, again, I'm definitely not saying like skinny people can't write fat people or anything. I generally say like stick to them as your side characters, or like your, or just like that's the descriptor of their body. Like, like
it's not their personality.
They're a size, you know, that you could say like, oh, like the character might say like, oh, my size 20 or whatever. So you establish, okay, she's a bigger girl, or like plushy skin, whatever, however you want to do it. But then like leave it there. Like that's, you know, because I've read Kat Blackthorne for Halloween Boys books. That was fine with me because I mean, she's very thin author. But like Blythe, the main character, like I think it was mentioned like once or twice, maybe a couple of times. I don't know. I didn't feel offended by anything she wrote. And she never really got into the characters. Like there was no like head spinning. There was no fat phobia. So all of that was fine with me.
No.
It didn't take me out of the story. It wasn't like, how dare you? No. And she hasn't really used that much too in her marketing strategies either for that. So I appreciate that. I mean, sometimes I see like, of course I see artwork and stuff where the girl is chubby or whatever.
That's where it definitely will throw you off, is when you see the marketing and like, the words and the images of people being like, yeah, it's a plus size character, or they won't even say plus size, they'll say curvy. Curvy has become the new like palatable whitewashed version of plus size,
which to me means like Ashley Graham or like
it means she's got like great tits and a great ass, like
and an hour like teeny tiny waist,
but that's not what plus size looks like for most people.
It was funny. My one friend, when I showed her the cover for I Like You Like That, she's like, oh, I pictured Birdie bigger. I said fat people, and usually, unless like you know, because Birdie is a size 18, 20 maybe, and so
and that's like me.
So it's like a size 18, 20 person from the side who's being leaned back a little. I was like, they're not gonna look like.
And I can say, as somebody who is a size 18 or 20, like what size 18, 20 looks like on me looks also very different on
somebody else.
4 inches shorter than me or 3 inches taller than me. So I mean, everybody is so different. It's so funny.
Yeah, and that was interesting because that was like a thin person telling me that, and I thought that was so interesting. I was like, huh. It's just really important. This goes for any author, right? Like when I was writing Rain Me In, I have a Black character. His name's Jake. And people ask me if I'm going to write his book because they love Jake. I love Jake too. I love how I wrote Jake. I love everything about Jake. And there's part of me that wishes I could write Jake. And maybe I could with like very cautious care and like sensitivity readers and stuff. But I just don't want to.
I feel the same way.
I just don't feel like it's my story to tell. I just love him so much. And I know that other people love him, but at the same time, I'm like, it's just, I don't feel like I can picture in my mind, of course, what his story would be. And again, I don't feel like I have the ability to tell it in a way that would like be good for,
or authentic.
Like authentic.
Yeah, no,
yeah.
I get that. And this is what we talk about when anytime people, I mean, we see this conversation happen like once a month online, let's be honest, where it's always a discussion about how a white author has inserted harmful stereotypes, usually about BIPOC characters. Sometimes it's queer characters into their books. And when that specific affected community talks about it, there's usually pushback, or there's usually some kind of response like, well, I want to have diverse characters, but now you're telling me that I can't, or that I shouldn't, or that there's only one way to do them. And it's a very delicate, nuanced conversation to have. And I think if you really want to write those characters, you know, I mean, one, you have to examine like why is it that like I want to tell this particular character's story. Two, I don't think you can ever, like, I could never write a character and like the story be about their blackness or like their proximity to blackness. Like it would not make any sense. It would be so inauthentic and inappropriate, honestly. But I feel like there is a way to do it. There would need to be a lot of sensitivity reading. There would need to be like a lot of own voices consultations to like make sure it's accurate and respectful. So I think there's a way to do it. I don't know. I don't think a lot of people want to put in that effort, work and effort to do it, which is sad.
So who knows? Maybe someday. But
yeah,
I started out, you know, with the two brothers. That was my intention with the series. So Gavin first, that Kate is the second.
I was gonna say that was gonna be my question to like kind of wrap us up too, is now that you've got, you know, this is obviously book 1 in the Cowboys of Nighthawk, you know, series, and what do we have planned to look forward to?
Cade, I set his book up. He has a lot of issues, my poor Cade. He's 21, has an alcohol problem, is kinky. He's a kinky boy. So his book, during the whole time that I was writing Rain Me, I was like, oh my God, I can't wait to write his book. It's going to be so fun. And I'm getting a lot of people being like, oh my God, I love Kate. And I knew that would happen. Yeah, so that's the plan for to release probably next year. I still have the second book of Wish written, and I owe it to my readers to finish it. So I said I would get it out this year. So I'm trying. Hopefully that'll be out later this year. And then I just had this idea to do the Christmas novella, and I was like, I still want to write something new, but I can't have it take up a ton of time. So I was like, let's try a novella. So hopefully that too, if I can get that done and written.
Well, this has been a delight. I feel like we could continue talking for so long, but as we wrap it up, I just want to ask you to tell everybody where they can find and follow you and keep up with what's coming up next for you.
Yes. Well, my website is just my name, KaylaGrosse.com, and you can sign up for my newsletter there and stay up to date that way. I'm really terrible at it, so you'll get very sporadic newsletters. And then I'm on Twitter at Kayla Grosse. This is my one thing. All my names are different, so I'm sorry, guys. Instagram is at Kayla Writes Life, and TikTok is at Kayla Grosse Author. I did not think anyone was going to follow me really when I made them. So
well, they do. And they will, and if they want to find you, they will make it happen. So, and I will, of course, include links for where to find Kayla, as well as a link for her latest release, Rein Me in today's show notes. So I hope everyone enjoys it as much as I did. And I think I'm ready for like a cowboy renaissance. And maybe this is also coming. I am actually ghostwriting a cowboy romance series that's very funny. Very much like it started during the pandemic and I'm still continuing it. But it's just so far out of my wheelhouse, but I'm kind of loving it. And I would love nothing more than to see more plus-size characters in the cowboy romance sphere. So this is a great place to start.
Well, the town of Randall, where my book takes place, I realized after I wrote it that all the women, except for Blake's mom, the mom and the grandma, are like the only women who are straight size. Everybody else
it's that Southern cooking, right?
I know.
Like it's Texas. That's how that, yes.
So it is the town of curvy women, let's just say. So
we love it.
I said, yeah. Somebody said, where do I sign up to live there? I said, I know, right? Hot cowboys.
You tell me the time and the place, and I'll be there. Yeehaw.
Thank you.
As it should be. Well, thank you so much, Kayla, for hanging out and chatting with me about your book, about plus-size romance in general, about so many weird fandoms.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been super fun.
Thanks so much for listening. Tune in every Friday for a brand new episode of Boobies and Newbies. And don't forget, you can always catch up on previous episodes on your favorite podcast app or on boobiesandnewbies.com. Happy reading!